Welcome to Age Hackers, powered by Gladden Longevity with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, where our passion is to help you live young for a lifetime. On this show, we want to help you optimize your longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information by answering 3 questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? And how do we live well beyond 120? I'm Steve Ryder, and Dr. Gladden, we just wrapped up with Dr. William Pawluk. And this is one that as soon as I saw it come in, that we had it scheduled, I was super excited because I bought his book, Power Tools for Health, back in 2019 when I got a small PEMF device by Micropulse. And I'm a fan of his. I've listened to him on a handful of other podcasts, and PEMF therapy is something I've always been fascinated with as long as I've been a biohacker, quote unquote. And so you integrated PEMS, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, into your practice. And so talk a little bit about PEMF as kind of a primer for the listeners.
Probably about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we got a mat, and I've played with it ever since and used it. It's a really fascinating area. I think one of the key things in the whole PEMF area is that people don't really know how to use it. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're going to find in this podcast is that Dr. Pawluk, we got him to break this down into actually what's it doing, how it's interfacing with the body, the things that it's actually affecting at a cellular level, and then build a case all the way up to how do you use this thing and what kind of device is right for you. So I think you'll find this to be a fascinating podcast because we go all the way from the basics right up to the very practical.
And his website is drpawluk.com, drpawluk.com. And at the end of the podcast, he gives 3 different devices that he's offering for our listeners for the next 30 days with a discount. And those coupon codes will be in the show notes. And I can't recommend his books enough because I got Supercharge Your Health with PEMF Therapy. It's a super quick ebook read, free. Just go to the website and get that one. And then if you want to do a deep dive into PEMF, Power Tools for Health is definitely the way to go if you want to learn more about this. So this was a really good one.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Age Hackers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, and I'm here with my sidekick and friend, Steve Ryder. Steve, how are you doing today?
Dr. Gladden, I'm doing excellent.
Okay. You sent me a picture this weekend. You were in a mountain surrounded by snow and a lake that looked like maybe it hadn't thawed yet. I don't know. What was that all about?
Yeah. So my original plan was to go hike up to Silver Dollar Lake, which is outside of Georgetown, Colorado. And the snow prevented me from getting more than halfway there. And so turned around and then butt sledded down the mountain a bit and had so much fun. I hiked back up and did it 2 more times.
Okay. Now, did you have anything to put under your butt, or were you?
No, just these Costco shorts, and it was great.
Okay, good.
I'm glad there wasn't anything sharp.
Yeah, exactly.
And enough people had done it before that I was good.
Oh, they'd already cleaned out the trail, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good for you. Well, fun, very fun. All right. Well, yeah, I got in a couple mountain bike rides this weekend, which was super fun. So yeah, I'm in Puerto Rico now, and I'm basically have access to my Vasper all the time. So I'm really going to double down on the Vasper use and get myself in amazing shape again. So anyway, excited about that. Everything is good, really. I'm riding well, but in fact, I'm riding better than I ever have,
really?
Technique-wise. Yeah, faster than I ever have. It's very, very fun. But I can tell that my legs are not where they were because when I use the Vasper, I'm able to build that strength in a really dramatic way. So I'm super pumped because 3 weeks from now, I will be motoring up those hills like it's nothing. So that'll be great.
Well, let me give you a little secret for doing better. I had a colleague friend of mine who does a lot of racing. He's raced across the country twice. And he uses a small portable battery operated device that he places on either his glutes or his quads. And he beat the competition the first time he did it. And now he uses it regularly, whatever he's riding. His muscles don't fatigue as fast. They work longer, harder, and recover
Nice.
faster.
So the voice that you hear is Dr. William Pawluk. And we have yet to introduce him, but you can tell that he's eager to jump on and start contributing. So welcome to the show, Bill. It's good to have you here. So this device, we're going to be talking today about pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, which is a really, really, really interesting topic. We use it in our practice, but we're talking with really one of the world's experts here today, and I think we're all going to learn a lot from Bill. That being said, the question I would have, Bill, is, was this a PEMF device of some sort that your friend was putting on his thighs, or something? Okay.
Really? Absolutely. It's battery operated,
okay,
portable, so you can stick it in a pocket and put your leads over where you want them and then just go on about your activity.
Good. Well, I may have to pick up one of those just to play with it. That'd be fun. Good.
Now, I do have a warning. If you do get the urge to put on a cape,
yes,
it's okay. But if you get the urge to jump over a tall building,
call me. Or off a tall building, probably. That's even more important.
Well, don't worry about that.
Yeah, I've done a few.
After that, I don't care.
That's right.
Really.
I've done some jumps for sure. Not like my son. My son will clear 20-foot gaps. I'm not there, but nor do I think in this lifetime I won't be there. But 2-3 feet gap, that's fine. So, but anyway, yeah, I love that. We'll definitely give it a shot. So, Dr. Pawluk, tell us a little bit about how you got to be interested in PEMF. I know you're an MD, you were trained in Canada, you trained in the US, but give us a little bit of a run up to how you got involved with all this.
So way back when, that was like literally back in the early mid 80s, I would say. Late 80s. I was the medical director of a group, and I was the senior family physician for a larger family medicine group. We had 14 family doctors, the biggest family medicine group on the whole East Coast. And we shared patients. We clearly rounded in the hospital and shared our patients. In the span of around about a week, we had at least 2 admissions, near-death admissions for GI bleeding. The common cause, ibuprofen.
So just so the audience understands, ibuprofen is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. It irritates the stomach, the gastric mucosa, and people can have serious bleeds, life-threatening bleeds from that. So,
Absolutely. And since then, I've also learned that there are about 30,000 deaths a year from non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. That includes not only GI bleeding, but also kidney
failure and heart attacks. That's right.
Yeah. And heart attacks. So it's not an innocuous substance, and people use it like candy, unfortunately. So when you're using it like candy, it does those nasty things to us. Yeah. So anyway, at that point, I said, what are my alternatives? Again, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. And I said, the alternatives were opioids, which were still not persona non grata back then, or ibuprofen, aspirin, surgery, etc. So you didn't have a lot of choices. And I said, well, this is not what I would call good medicine. This is crazy medicine. This is insanity. Doing it over and over and over again, hoping for no bad results. Right?
It's a permutation of Einstein's famous statement. Yeah.
That's a permutation. Thank you for naming it.
No, we caught it. We didn't let you slip past us.
So I said, okay, fine, I got to do something different. And I knew about acupuncture. And it wasn't that common back then, but I decided to bite the bullet, leave the house of medicine, and step out of the house of medicine and move over to a different house. So I learned acupuncture, and I came back, and I was trying to do acupuncture in my community. So at the time that I was trained in acupuncture, there were probably only about 400 or 500 doctors in the country that had learned acupuncture, MDs, clinicians.
This is in the U.S. at that time?
And then this is in the U.S. This is actually in central New Jersey. And so I said, well, people didn't want to do acupuncture because nobody wanted needles. They didn't understand acupuncture. So you have to go through a tremendous amount of explanation why. And then say, needles, what? Me, needles? Forget about it. Forget about it. So I say, well, what am I going to do now? I can't do acupuncture with needles, but I want to do acupuncture because I know it's going to help your pain. I know it's going to help people a lot. So then I found out that in the Orient, they were using magnets on acupuncture points, little, strong, powerful little magnets on acupuncture points. And they're doing them on the ears. They were doing them on the head, but they're doing primarily the ears and the hands. and started working with them. And I started seeing things with the magnets that I didn't expect. That it wasn't just
So
about
what kind of things
acupuncture.
were you
There was a
seeing?
lot of tissue stuff
What kind
going
of
on.
things were you seeing?
Local edema
Okay.
reduction.
Edema is swelling, just so the
Local
audience knows. Yeah.
swelling. So any injury to the tissues
Yeah.
causes swelling, causes impairments in circulation, causes pain, classic signs of inflammation. So it was reducing all of that, but that was beyond the acupuncture point. It was not even on an acupuncture point, and it was doing all these things. So I said, well, wait a minute, what's this woo-woo? So acupuncture was already woo-woo, but this is now woo-woo besides
woo-woo
acupuncture.
Squared.
And or worse, or even more. So then I started looking into other devices and began to work with various configurations.
What kind of devices were available then?
There were multi-level marketing companies that were selling plasters, what they call plasters, or like square devices or little round circles, bigger than what I was using. Wraps that you could wrap around a back or a knee or a shoulder, etc. So they were static magnets, what we call static magnets, or permanent magnets.
So this is not pulse.
This is not pulse
electromagnetic frequency. This is basically just static magnetic field is what we're talking about.
The field is just there. It's like when you create a magnet, it's a magnet forever, essentially. And so you could put them on different parts of the body and they would work. But after some time, I discovered they had limitations.
So here's the deal.
So
you just go to your refrigerator, pull off the magnets and stick them where they're bothering you and then hang out for a while. Yeah.
And good luck. Cross your fingers. It may work, it may not work, because it depends on the problem and how deep the problem is, how extensive the problem is, and then trying to keep it on is always an
Scotch
issue.
Tape.
Please don't. Now, one of the things I discovered actually with magnets is that surgical tape is a big problem with magnets. Because if you do surgical tape over a magnet, the magnet actually can cause leaching of the adhesive, and you get a chemical burn.
Yeah. And some people are allergic to tape in the first place, so I'm sure that's good.
And you have that issue in addition to that. So it's not completely innocuous, and it's not completely effective. Then I started doing a lot more reading and discovered there are other devices they had that were, in fact, pulsed magnetic field devices. And so started acquiring them and started using them. And eventually, I kept asking, where's the science? What's the science? What's happening here? Physiologically, what's happening? And the problem is most of that science knowledge was locked up in Eastern Europe. It was in Cyrillic. It was in obscure journals in Europe that were not available here in the West. But along the way, I met a doctor at a symposium, and we were on stage together, and he told me, by the way, I have a manuscript. And he was an MD, PhD from the Czech Republic. And he said, I have a manuscript, and I had translated all that science to get his PhD with magnetic field therapy in rehab. He had translated all that science. So he had a manuscript. So he gave me the manuscript, and he said, here, we want to publish this. We want to get this into the hands of people in the West. And so I rewrote the manuscript, essentially, to make it more legible, more readable, but it's still highly summarized. So that resulted in a book called Magnetic Field Therapy in Eastern Europe, a review of 30 years of research. So at that point, in about 95, 30 years of research already had been happening. Right? So the manuscript just blew my mind, because now we had a lot of the science. We had a lot of clinical studies, we had animal studies, we had laboratory studies, we had randomized controlled studies. So that just sort of blew the door wide open. Now I understood why it was working, how it was working, the mechanisms
so let's delve into that, because I want the audience to understand how this is working. But before we go into that, when people hear about EMFs, electromagnetic fields, and now we're talking about pulsed EMFs, let's just describe for them the difference between the EMF exposure that we all have from our phones and devices and all this sort of thing, and what you're talking about here, just so people have a sense of what that is.
So PEMFs, pulsed electromagnetic fields, were actually discovered before EMFs were discovered. This predates Wi-Fi. It predates microwave towers. Right? So that didn't exist back then. EMFs, what we're describing as EMFs, which stands for electromagnetic fields. I call it environmental magnetic fields, okay, as opposed to pulse magnetic fields per se. The difference is very fundamentally basic. One is that the EMFs are broadcast into the environment. They literally have waves. Okay, that includes radio, FM, radar, microwaves, you name it, anything that's blasted into the environment. That keeps on going. It doesn't stop. Most of those waves are extremely short, and therefore they get absorbed by biology. Let's say biology. That's the basis behind a microwave oven. These very short wavelengths are absorbed by whatever you put in the oven, which then heats it. So heating is a major component of the cause of a problem with EMFs. PEMF stands for pulsed electromagnetic field. So rather than being a wavelength, it's pulsing.
Okay.
Right? And every pulse produces a magnetic field that goes out and comes back. So basically, a pulse is created by current flowing through a wire. Right? And that current flowing through a wire is subject to what we call the right-hand rule. My thumb is the current, and the magnetic field is produced. Every time you have current flowing, you produce a magnetic field. Laws of physics, they're inseparable. So when it pulses, the magnetic field goes out and comes back. It's a closed loop. The EMFs in the environment are open loop. They just keep going. This is a closed loop, right? It comes back to its source.
Interesting. I did not know about the return. I knew about the going out, even with the pulsed element, but it's returning. It doesn't continue to propagate.
It's always returning back to the wire.
Is what you're saying. Okay.
That's correct. So that's what makes it safe. It's a pulse and not a wave, specifically. Now, it has some of the wave characteristics because as the pulse goes through, because it's pulsing at a certain rate, then it does go like that as well. But again, it's not a continuous wave.
On some level, it has to be a wave, right? So, but it's going out and back is what you're saying. So,
correct.
Intriguing. So
that's closed loop.
So it's closed loop. Now, the PEMF itself has some really interesting interfaces with biology, and they're really quite numerous. But there's a few core ones. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this interacts with cells? Because we can treat symptoms, we can treat pain, we can help tissues regenerate, we can accelerate healing, do some of these things with PEMF. But do you want to talk a little bit about the biology of how this is actually interfacing with the cells that's facilitating some of this?
So, classic physics. One aspect of classic physics is that other than metal, which can block a magnetic field or cause it to have to move around the metal, biology is completely permeable to a magnetic field. Think of it this way. A magnetic field is like the wind in the trees. You don't see it. It's not staying in the trees. It's going to keep on going. But while it's passing through the tree, it's causing motion.
Yep.
And that motion then stimulates the tree actually to be more active and more alive, quite frankly. So it does have a benefit even to the trees. But in terms of biology, in terms of human cellular biology or animal cellular biology or plants for that matter, right? It's affecting all of those because the magnetic field, as it's passing through those cells, whatever those cells are, it's increasing the development of charge. And that is Faraday's law. So Faraday discovered that if you take a circuit where you have a light bulb in that circuit, you take a wire loop in the circuit, part of that wire goes through the lamp and comes back around. If you take a magnetic field and you pulse that magnetic field past the wire, you induce charge. You're inducing current, which turns on the light bulb.
So
that's what happens in the body.
So magnets and electricity are, you can't have one without the other, essentially.
You can't have one without the other.
That's why it's called electromagnetic radiation from the sun, let's say, or anything else, right? So that being said, we're increasing charge inside the cells, which is interesting because the membranes of cells contain charge. And as people age and cells start to decline in function, the polarity or the level of charge across these membranes starts to decrease, right? And so
injury causes that to happen, correct?
Yeah,
especially
injury will cause that. Aging will cause that. And so if you're pulsing this in, you're reestablishing healthy levels of charge in the cell. Is it possible to overcharge a cell?
The good thing is that unless you're causing heating, basically the cell is going to have its limits to what it can do. After that, it doesn't do anything. It basically ignores the magnetic field. So we've discovered this actually shows up in inflammation, managing inflammation. It's been found out that you need about an optimal magnetic field level of about 15 Gauss. So Gauss or Gauss is a term used to describe the intensity of the magnetic field. So 15 Gauss is the optimum level of magnetic field intensity that you need at the adenosine receptor. So at the receptors on the cell membranes, you need 15 Gauss optimally. And so the curve goes up and flattens out. So it's an asymptotic curve. So it goes up and flattens out. At the peak, it flattens out. That means anything beyond that 15 Gauss is basically ignored.
So, and in doing that, at the adenosine receptors, which are on the cell membrane, then we're creating charge there. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
And we must be.
It's actually attaching to the membrane receptors. The adenosine
so
receptors.
we must be changing charge inside of mitochondria also, I would think.
Absolutely. Right? So magnetic field therapy increase mitophagy. They increase permeability of mitochondrial membranes themselves. So it's not just the cellular membrane; it's also the organelles inside the membrane, inside the cell as well. And so, yes, magnetic stimulation of mitochondria becomes important. Magnetic field therapy has been found to increase ATP production, which is produced by mitochondria, ATP production by between 100 to 400%.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot, 100 to 400%. So, before we started the show in earnest, we were talking about mountain biking, or maybe we captured that in the show. I'm not sure, but we were talking about mountain biking, and you were telling us about a friend of yours that had an EMF device that he stuck in his pocket and attached to his thighs. Two electrodes to his thighs, so to speak. And then I suppose this was a battery operated device that was pulsing a magnetic field into his thighs. And you were saying that he was able to ride much further, much faster with less fatigue.
And keep up with young 50-year-olds, and he's a 60-year-old. So he actually won the first race as a 60-year-old against 50-year-olds, with the only difference being the magnets on his thighs.
Yeah, nice. And is there a training element to that also? In other words, if he were to ride, like there are muscle contraction devices out there, right, that will put an electrical current into the muscle and cause it to contract, which can accelerate muscle growth and hypertrophy and things like that. You can build power that way. Nu-X is one, Compex is another. With the PEMF, is this doing anything to the cell to modify it permanently to where the ATP are now more capable? If he rode like that for a week with those on and then he took them off, would he be at a higher level than he was before he put them on?
For a while. Yeah. Because unless you actually do change remodel the cell itself, and if you remodel the cell, but the cell remodeling depends on the magnetic field, and then it reaches a peak,
it can only become
plateau. Then after that, you still need the magnetic field because you cut it back. Or if you stop activity, you stop doing the stuff that caused that muscle to enlarge. Well, then obviously you lose ground.
No, but I'm just wondering if it works as a training effect as well as a performance effect. So,
the answer is yes.
To both.
To both.
Okay. Yeah.
To both. Because if you train harder, you build more. Right, you build more, you train more. Now, it may be that you may need to have stronger magnetic fields to go even higher. So you can start off with like he did, a pretty low intensity machine. If he did much higher, there is research that shows that magnetic therapy stimulation of muscle causes more torque production out of that muscle than electrical stim does without the pain.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, because electrical stim can be done with both AC and then DC currents, interestingly enough. We won't get into that.
But they're both painful.
they can be if you crank them up hard enough, right? So,
well, but then you don't get the results if you
that's
don't crank
right.
it up
The
hard
AC
enough.
can get pretty painful, particularly when you really crank it up. I've got a lot of experience with that. And the DC gets a little uncomfortable, but for some reason, not as much. But it's interesting that you could use PEMF. That's interesting. You know, they make bodysuits now where people are contracting muscles. They have electrical stim devices in the bodysuits. It seems like you could do a similar
Right.
bodysuit with PEMF.
Well, yes
Okay.
and no.
Tell me about
Now, the bodysuits that you do for electrical stim don't require as
that.
much
Okay.
power.
Got it.
Right now, you can produce a lot more power by having it plugged into a
Mm-hmm.
wall. But most of the magnetic field devices, like for example, if you did what you're talking about with a whole bodysuit, you're going to have a big
Okay. Well,
battery.
here's the deal. If you're riding an e-bike, you just plug into your bike.
This is true. This is absolutely true. You could.
I know
There's an
that's right.
opportunity
There's an
here.
opportunity to plug into your e-bike. Okay. I can see this. Okay. I can see it happening. So we digress. So let's get back to cellular function, because this is what's so critical. So if you're actually improving cellular function like this, then you're enabling the body in essence, and everything else that you want to come forward, whether it's clearing edema, decreasing pain, accelerating healing, improving, fitness, longevity. These all things come as secondary effects to this in essence. Is that correct?
Essentially. So in my book, my first book, Power Tools for Health, I provide evidence, references for 25 different actions of PEMFs. Since then, I've discovered some others, including stimulating the endocannabinoid system.
So run through some of these.
I'm
curious. Run through some of these cellular effects.
ATP is one we mentioned already. So you can dramatically increase ATP production, but that's short-lived. Every ATP molecule is basically recycled about 500 times a day. So ATP production is short-lived. You have to keep producing it. You have to keep stimulating it. And what magnetic field therapy does for ATP production is it increases ATP production, so go from ADP to ATP. But then ATP by itself does nothing. It's just available as a resource.
No, that's right. And if you're exercising, then it's then you're gonna use it, right? So
you're going to use it. You're going to recycle, cycle faster. So magnetic field therapy not only helps to create ATP, but actually helps to hydrolyze it as well, which is releasing one of the phosphates to release the energy, and then it keeps recycling it. So as long as you're doing the magnetic field therapy, while you're doing it, you're increasing the total amount of ATP production. But when you stop, obviously it's like the body, and that's one of the sort of phenomena basically with aging, is that you just don't produce as much ATP.
Yeah, and some of that's due to mitochondrial degradation. Some of it's due to low NAD levels for lots of variety of reasons.
A bunch of precursor factors, and the precursors are all necessary as well. So if you have a depleted organism and you give it magnetic field therapy, you're trying to make a dying horse, work faster and harder, but it's going to die faster too.
That's right. Yeah, you can't basically create something from nothing. So you've got to have something to work with. So. Okay, what are some of the other mechanisms that it...
Right, ATP, nitric oxide production.
Now, nitric oxide is critical for sexual function, brain function, cardiovascular function, exercise function. We're talking about
cardiovascular function because it vasodilates. But nitric oxide is also very important in the immune system.
True. Yeah, nitric oxide.
Okay, we don't normally talk about the immune system when it comes to nitric oxide. We talk about the vasodilating effects primarily. So NO is really critical, and that also helps with edema and circulation for those two reasons. Clearly, circulation, huge improvements in circulation, but it's not just improving the circulation; it's also decreasing the viscosity of the fluid.
So this means that the blood is less prone to clot for the audience, so you understand. If you're decreasing viscosity, you're making the blood less sluggish, and so it's less prone to pool.
It flows more
easily. Exactly. And there's less chance of a clot. Okay. Right.
But relative to clotting, one of the other important factors about PEMFs is they are antiplatelet.
Okay. So
they have an antiplatelet capacity action as well.
That's what your
But
ibuprofen is
unlike
doing, essentially, is...
No, well, it is, but primarily to platelets. But the difference is that magnetic field therapy is also fibrinolytic.
Okay. So now fibrinolytic means it's dissolving clots. So we're thinning the blood in addition to decreasing viscosity.
We're decreasing the risk, and if we are increasing the risk of clotting or clumping, essentially, we're at the same time decreasing the clumping action, or at the action after it's clumped. So that's again a big reason for using it in any kind of circulatory disorders.
So could somebody use this, in your experience, could somebody use this in conjunction with being on a blood thinner? Let's say they had a deep vein thrombosis in their leg. Would this be helpful to them in some way, or?
There's a warning. It's a caution. It's not a contraindication. Contraindication. It's a caution. So because you can have the effects of aspirin and you could have the effects of anti-clotting agents, and at the same time you're having effects of the PEMF therapy. So 1 + 1 may equal 2, but it could equal 10, depending on the person and the situation. Exactly. So the risk of bruising then increases as well. Okay,
so the other take-home message for the audience is don't jump on your PEMF mat and then go in and have a surgical procedure done, or have a tooth extracted or something. Your blood may be a little thinner potentially. So,
well, if you're given a heparin or you're using an anticoagulant before that. So yes, you're absolutely correct. In fact, actually, research has shown people who work in factories with magnetic assemblies, that women working in factories with magnetic assemblies, basically at the pelvic level, they start having heavier periods.
Interesting.
Right, so that is one of the consequences. It's not a contraindication; it's a caution.
Okay, and then give us some of the other things that it does.
One of my favorite topics.
Sex. No? I don't know.
Well,
yes.
I'm trying to read your mind. It can help with that. That was on my mind. But now that you mention it, we can increase testosterone production.
Good.
So if you put a magnet or magnets in your pelvic area next to the testicles, yes, you'll produce more testosterone. Interesting. But that's not what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk.
That's what the audience wants to hear about. So what do you want to talk about?
It's more mundane than that. Stem cells.
That's not mundane.
That's another good one.
All right. I have a story, an experience. I had a 3.5-year-old child that cut off the end of her thumb just below the nail. Before the joint, just after the joint, but below the nail. And they retained the piece of tissue. And the father calls me before the surgeons had at it. And the father says, what do I do with this? Do I want to give it to the surgeon, let the surgeon do with it? And I know what the surgeon would do, clean up the wound and put a graft on it. Right? Close it up as much as you can. Most likely because of the size of the wound, you're going to have to graft it. So I said, well, if you do that, this 3-year-old is going to have a deformed thumb for the rest of her life. So let's do this. I'd heard in Europe that they were actually doing it under age 11, that they were just keeping it clean. So we had them reattach it. And I have pictures in my book, and Supercharged book. I'm sorry, in the Power Tools book, I have pictures of that. You can see the suture marks. 12 weeks later, she's regrowing her nail.
Beautiful.
Regrew
now,
the
tell
thumb.
me how PEMF played a role here. You were doing what with that?
Stem cells.
Yeah, you were activating stem cells with PEMF. Right. So what kind of PEMF?
Yep, and growth factors. So you get over 140 different growth factors. Research has shown that PEMFs basically put into a culture where you're growing stem cells, basically trying to grow neural stem cells in particular. They discovered that there's about 140 growth factors increased as a result of that, and you had a 400% increase in stem cell production.
Wow.
But stem cells not only increase the production, PEMFs not only increase the production of stem cells, they increase the differentiation of the stem cells. They increase the motion of the stem cells, the migration of the stem cells, and they improve their survival.
So anybody having a stem cell procedure would benefit from using PEMF in conjunction with it. Let's say they're using some form of stem cells, right?
My favorite expression around this is you can't grow a garden in a swamp.
Can't grow a garden in a swamp? Yeah, no, I like that too. I think a lot of people, I would say you can't grow a garden in a sewer because the body's
Well,
fairly.
you can't grow. You probably can't grow
Yeah.
anything in a sewer. Well, that's
Well,
not
that's not
sure.
entirely true.
Rats
But
or whatever.
but the point we're making here is that if you're going to have a procedure like that, you kind of need to clean up the environment so that the stem cells can do their work. Because otherwise, there's a lot of toxic cytokines, a lot of other things that will actually inhibit stem cell function and growth and differentiation. So cleaning it up, doing things like plasmapheresis or detox or, things like that is one way to prepare for it. It sounds like PEMF is another way to prepare for it. And
A
yeah,
lot cheaper.
and the PEMF, both, well, I don't know if it has to be done during, but certainly after for a period of,
I would say
yeah.
during too. I would say before, during, after, and
Okay.
continuing.
All right. Nice. I like it.
So you're going to spend $4,000, $12,000 for a stem cell transplant. You really should be doing PEMF therapy before you do that.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have much more certainty. We know this in cardiac stem cells, that the survival rates of cardiac stem cells are lousy, pretty bad. So, and so if we did magnetic field therapy before, during, and after, better survival of the stem cell.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by H2 Molecular Hydrogen in the Gladden Longevity Store.
Yeah, Steve, you've heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcast in terms of the benefits of H2 and hydrogen water. We love it. It's really the best way to balance your entire redox system. So it really protects you from free radical damage. I take it every time I get on a flight to protect me from radiation damage when I'm flying. And I use it to rejuvenate my brain in the afternoon. There's really two kinds of exercise. There's physical exercise, and taking H2 before or after that works great. But also there's mental exercise. And I find that the H2 will bring your brain back when you're tired in the afternoon. So I think it's like the perfect thing for longevity and for performance, quite honestly.
And I talked to you about this, that I found dropping 1 or 2 tablets in a glass of water right before bed. I've seen an overall bump in my deep sleep when I do so. And
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you click on the store tab when you visit GladdenLongevityShop.com and use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order. And this code isn't only good for our H2 product, but it's also good for all the supplements we carry. So podcast10 at the GladdenLongevityShop.com.
Yeah, one of the other things that I use it for routinely is when I'm about to go on a mountain bike ride. And I will say this, that if I go on a long mountain bike ride, I will take one prior, I'll take one during, and I'll take one after. And some of the Ironmen that we've worked with have said that when they're doing an Ironman, they'll take it 3 or 4 times throughout the race. And their comment is that it's like taking out the old battery and putting in a new one. It really rejuvenates your body's ability to perform when you're doing more extended athletic activity. So think about that too. If you want to go do a longer hike or whatever else, take it with you.
So GladdenLongevityShop.com, enter podcast 10 for 10% off your order.
H2 molecular hydrogen. It's low-hanging fruit on your quest to make 100 the new 30. So are there any other features of PEMF that you want to bring out that it does in terms of the biology here?
Well, the wound healing, nitric oxide production, anti-infection.
Okay, tell us about that.
The immune system is very, very important with PEMF therapy as well, largely because of the neutrophil, but it's beyond that even.
The neutrophil is the white
So not only are you enhancing the immune system, but you're also enhancing the motility of white blood cells to go to an area of infection or inflammation. So you increase the body's capacity to fight infection. You're enhancing, and it's doing it through a bunch of mechanisms all at one time. It's doing the circulation thing, it's doing the stem cell thing, it's doing the ATP production. It's all that's happening. So which one of those mechanisms is the one that's most important? I don't care.
No, it's a symphony anyway. It's a concert being played. Totally. In fact, they all work better if they're playing together, right? So, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, are you able to augment the immune system in people that have cancer?
Yes. So in cancer is a sort of a really good place for PEMF therapy. I had a colleague friend who had stage 4 colon cancer. He had carcinomatosis. And he had high PEC. He had all kinds of treatments. So he was only 50, around 50. He lived with magnetic field therapy plus other therapies, nutrition included, supplements, etc., which you should combine. He lived 7 years with stage 4 cancer.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I had another lady who had colorectal cancer who lived 4 years. She came to me late. She already had stage 4. She lived another 4 years. So we use it all the time. PEMF therapy helps them have more vitality. PEMFs have been found to actually decrease the side effects of chemo, while at the same time actually as much as doubling the benefits of the chemo.
That's fascinating. There are several things out there the audience should understand that can do this kind of thing. Like it's been shown, molecular hydrogen can do this, decrease the side effects and increase the efficacy.
And combined hydrogen plus PEMF therapy, because hydrogen doesn't act as a stimulus, an energetic stimulus. So PEMF therapy is activating, right, all sorts of things. Hydrogen is a supply, which then gives the body the ability to work better. But if you combine them, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2.
No, that's right. You're getting these more than additive effects, which is, really very cool. So then the question becomes, what kind of PEMF device do you use for what indication? It's been shown that you can use really kind of low intensity PEMF for certain things, but it's also what I've seen so far, and our experience has been using higher intensity PEMF seems to be better for a lot of things. But then also if you get the intensity high enough, some people get pretty uncomfortable with it. And respond to it. So sort this out for us. And I know there's a bit of trial and error this, with the individual, but how do you think about this?
All right. So these are all very important questions. And I sort of dealt with those questions in my new book, Supercharge Your Health with PEMF Therapy. And there I review 80 different conditions and the protocol that you need for those conditions. But if we understand the physiology first, all the mechanisms of action, and it doesn't matter what the disease is. Most diseases share a lot of the same mechanisms of action, same pathophysiologic mechanisms. So PEMFs will address all of this regardless of the disease. It's not one disease, one treatment, not one problem, one treatment. So there's so many things happening. So in the book, Supercharge Your Health, I have tables. So your choices are basically local, medium, covering like a chest or a belly, regional, like an area around a hip, or whole body. Quite frankly, everybody should do whole body.
Yeah, what's the downside? There's no downside.
The body never sleeps. Right? If we have 100 trillion cells in our bodies and every cell has about 1,000 biochemical processes per second, when should we stop doing magnetic field therapy? I don't have a good answer. And as you said, it's experimental. The body's going to have to find out. Your body's going to have to tell you. So essentially, you have to decide on local, medium, local, regional, or whole body, weak, medium strength, or high strength.
Yeah. And
charge production, Faraday's law, per Faraday's law, dB/dt. Change in intensity divided by the change in time. The higher the intensity and the faster it rises to its peak, the more energy production in the tissues, in the body.
Right.
So intensity matters. Intensity is critical, I think. So that little girl with the thumb, she would have done better faster.
Now, the other thing about intensity,
to a point,
the other thing about intensity is that the size of the applicator makes a difference here too, or can. Is that true? In other words, if you...
Oh, totally, because the magnetic field is produced by the applicator. It's not produced by the device. The device is driving current into the applicator, into the coils, and the coils produce the magnetic field. So yes, the amount of windings in a coil, the intensity of the current going into the coil, all of that determines it. Generally speaking, whole body magnetic fields are weaker than local, because you're taking the same amount of power coming out of the control unit,
a smaller area,
and you're putting it into a smaller area. You're going to produce a much stronger magnetic field. So for local treatments, it becomes more useful for local problems, but for whole body, it becomes a challenge. And then for treating the whole body, you don't really want to have that much power as you would locally. You don't really need it. It's just energizing the whole body, basically.
And so if somebody is struggling with something that's a systemic problem, then a whole body is going to be the way to go, it sounds like. If somebody's struggling with a local problem, like a joint, then maybe have something more focal would be useful. Is that kind of how you're thinking about this? Or a muscle?
Well, being a functional medicine doctor, I tend to think about the person. People come to me because they got a knee problem or they're bone on bone and they're recommending a joint replacement. I said, what about the rest of you? Oh, yeah, I got some back problems too, but they're not bothering me that much. And I'm 75 and, well, yeah, I'm slowing down and my mind's not working so well. Well, what am I going to do? If I just treat your knee, we're not providing you the best service. You should think more globally. You should think about the whole organism. So we can slow down your aging and help all those other areas get better too.
Well, I guess the question I have
So yes, you can just treat the knee or you can do the whole body.
Question I have though is that if my knee is hurting because I just did something to it, am I going to get the same amount of relief as quickly from the pain that I'm experiencing with the whole body as if I just focus something on there, realizing that whole body is going to be beneficial? But can I just, that's the question people are going to be asking.
Aha. And I have an answer.
Good. And what is it?
Almost all the whole body systems have local applicators.
Yes, this is true. Okay.
So almost all of the whole body systems have a range of applicators that you can choose from. And so they will generally provide you with a local treatment. Will then, from the same system, will provide you with probably a reasonable enough intensity for the local problem as well. The key, again, is always going to be strength. So here's one of my sort of pedestal points. People don't ask about intensity. Salespeople don't talk about intensity. You don't want. Why would you buy a car that you want a certain amount of power out of, and you don't ask for what the horsepower is?
No, that's right.
Right? You should know the intensity.
So how is the intensity reported?
Gauss, primarily.
Gauss. So, and what kind of Gauss should somebody have in a whole body system?
So what did I just say before about inflammation?
Well, you said 15, I think.
Minimum of 15. Okay, where does that 15 work?
Well, it works wherever it goes, I suppose.
With distance, all radiant activity.
So now we have, just so the audience knows, in electromagnetic radiation, the intensity falls off basically as the square of the distance. So
the inverse square. Inverse square of the distance.
Yeah. Right. So as you move further away, you're losing an exponential amount of power or energy.
Power or strength.
It's the closeness of the mat to your skin or the applicator to your knee or whatever it is that makes a big difference.
Or wherever you're treating.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, if you're treating across a brain, let's say for most people it's going to be about 6 inches. And you want to deliver the applicator over this side of the head, and you want to deliver 15 Gauss throughout the brain, but especially to get over to the other side. Based on the inverse square law, you're going to need 4,000 Gauss.
Okay.
If you're treating across a shoulder, okay, you're talking 2, 3 inches, 4 inches, depending on the size of the person. So you calculate the dose for that. And in the book, Supercharge Your Health, and on my website, I have a blog about the adenosine receptor, and it has tables of the intensity you need to drive that 15 Gauss, depending on the distance that you're trying to treat.
Got it. So that's how you're calculating. So for a larger, thicker person, they're going to need a higher pad Gauss.
Generally speaking.
Yeah. A lighter, thinner person, more easily penetrated. Does anybody ever put 2 applicators, one on each side of the head or one on the front and back of the shoulder?
Yes, I call that the magnetic sandwich. The problem there is that the machine has to be able to have that capability.
Okay. So it has.
Not all of them do.
And it probably has to be able to generate and synchronize 2 signals. Is that correct? Or do the signals interfere?
Well, it depends. If they're coming out of the same machine, you can have alternating signals. There are machines that do that. They just alternate back and forth. But you want both applicators to be producing the same signal at the same frequency. There are very few applicators or machines that allow you to control the intensity of each signal separately. There are some that are professional that cost about $40,000. And most of the time for those machines, you're paying mostly for furniture and commission.
Got it.
You're not paying for the magnetic device. So you can buy magnetic devices that are going to be comparable to those higher cost machines that will still deliver an adequate intensity. So I tend to top off at around 10,000 Gauss.
Okay.
So if you get a machine that can deliver 10,000, and if you can deliver 10,000 into each channel, even better still. But they're expensive. You're still going to be talking about a $12,000, $15,000 machine.
And so, in order for people to benefit from this, are they going to have to spend $12,000 to $15,000 on a machine?
So the benefit will depend on the equipment. The benefit will depend on the problem. The benefit will depend on the person. So if you're 70 versus 20, if you're, if you have had a condition, chronic shoulder that you have no shoulder function basically left, you have a frozen shoulder, it's going to take a lot of work for a long time to get that shoulder better. So you have to kind of know what you're dealing with. If you buy cheap, you get cheap. So if you're really serious about working with magnetic fields, and on drpawluk.com, we offer consultations to people free to make a recommendation for the right equipment. There's a ton of information on drpawluk.com, and there's a ton of information in the books. But sometimes having the consultation is very helpful. But we don't want to have a consultation for somebody who's only going to spend $20.
Sure. Yeah. No, I get that. There's going to be a price tag related to these. I think for the unit that we have, I think we spent around $6,000 or something like that. I can't remember. But the other thing I wanted to ask you was red light therapy. Red light does some really nice things also for mitochondria, ATP production, pain relief, things like that. Are these things complementary is the question.
Well, they absolutely are complementary. The question is one of distance again. Is the amount of energy you're delivering and how deep does that energy go? So red light therapy will be the strongest at the skin. Right? If you're doing red light into the brain, it's got to get through the skull. Right? It's got to go into the brain tissue, but then you're subject to the inverse square law again. So where red light therapy tends to not work as well is with depth.
Right.
So, but yes, you can combine them because they're different frequencies. They don't really interfere. This is what we call constructive interference and destructive interference. So they don't have destructive interference. And they do have constructive interference. In other words, they augment each other to a point.
Is it a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, or a 1 + 1 = 2, or 1 + 1 = 1.5?
It depends on the problem.
Okay.
Depends on the tissue, depends on the problem, depends on the length of treatment. So it can be 1 + 1 = 10.
Okay.
But in my experience, red light therapy is going to be much more effective superficially.
Okay.
And for that situation, for a superficial problem, you don't need a 20,000 Gauss machine or a 10,000 Gauss machine. You really need that for the deeper issue.
But to your point about treating the whole person, probably everybody is going to benefit from systemic EMF, PEMF therapy here, right? Because really what you were referring to earlier, I'm just kind of echoing you at this point, is to sort of build the infrastructure, the substrate of the human to basically support the healing that's going on in the shoulder or the brain or wherever else you're really trying to focus it. So, I'm just wondering about this because, what we found is that stacking different regenerative technologies together can be super helpful, right? Where if you're using peptides and you're using red light and you're using stem cells and PEMF, and you combine all these things together, you get like magical results.
Totally. And you're right. It's not 1 + 1 = 3 or 2. It could be 1 + 1 = 5 or 10. Again, depending on the circumstances, the device, the way it's used, the depth of the need. You can combine it with HBOT. You can combine it with stem cell therapies. You can combine it with infrared. So the list goes on and on. There's virtually nothing that you can't combine with PEMF. Sequencing may be a question, but generally speaking, like HBOT, for example, is really effective with PEMFs. And if you do PEMF therapy before HBOT
is hyperbaric oxygen therapy, just so we're not being cryptic here.
So hyperbaric drives oxygen into tissues. They provide the oxygen, and then they drive it under pressure into the tissues. Well, PEMF therapy increases the capability of those tissues to take that oxygen.
Are you aware of hyperbaric chambers that have PEMF built into them? Because I'm aware of, we have an ozone sauna that has PEMF built into it, which is interesting.
The risk is explosion.
Explosion, yeah.
Spark.
But it hasn't blown up yet.
So the risk is spark. So you could, if you have a home-based machine that's a fabric type device, you could then put the magnetic field under the HVOT chamber.
Got it. Yeah.
But you can sequence it. So you could do magnetic field therapy before or after hyperbaric. And then the combination, again, is not 1 + 1 = 2. It's, some other factor.
Fascinating. Very, very cool. And I think you have some units, if I'm not mistaken, right? That I don't know if you've developed these units or what it is, but I think you're making these available to the public.
Most of what we have been working with are produced by other people. So I'm always looking for solutions. And one manufacturer has one solution, another manufacturer has a different solution. So we combine things. And that's why on drpawluk.com, you'll see there's a huge list of devices that we have available. All right, so that's a resource. And there's a product comparison chart on the homepage. You click on that and it pulls up a comparison.
And do you have a way to test these devices to actually see if they're doing what they claim to be doing or any of that?
We have done that, yes. And then when we work with reliable manufacturers, then we know that they are producing something that we know works. So one of the devices we have is from Israel. It was made by an engineer, electrical engineer, who has been producing PEMF devices since the 70s. So very skilled, very knowledgeable. There are lots of people who get an idea, go find an engineer, and they go make the equipment. Untested, you don't know what you're necessarily getting. They can be very effective, but that could be a problem. We have developed some of the devices, but then I acquire devices, I use them, test them, evaluate them, and say, okay, now I could recommend it for the following.
That makes sense. What would be a problem with a device that could show up?
Well, it's electronic equipment. There are two kinds of higher intensity systems. One is basically a solid state, and most of the devices now are becoming more solid state. They are more durable. They don't require any maintenance. And then we have what are called spark chamber machines. So a spark chamber is like a spark plug. It produces a flash, and the magnetic field basically is like a flash. You don't see a flash, but it's like a flash. So it's very high intensity. It drops off very rapidly. So the chambers inside it have to decompress themselves. They have to get rid of that charge. So that there's a little tail on those charges. So they can be much more dynamic. And when you talk about muscle contractions, they can often be much more dynamic in producing muscle contractions. But that is a cost. And the cost, usually they're heavier. So they're not as portable. And they have to have maintenance. So every now and then that spark chamber has to be replaced like a spark plug. And then where is it manufactured? Is it adequate manufacturing? What's the backup? What's the warranty service? These become important factors. Otherwise, it's electronics. So electronics, it feels like any other electronics. It really doesn't have any moving parts per se.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much solid state type stuff. So not a lot to break, so to speak. Okay. Are there any other topics that you would like to touch on?
Well, we did talk a little bit at the beginning about devices that we could offer some discounts to your listeners.
Okay. Tell us about those. What have you got?
All right. So the three that we're talking about are the Flex Pulse, which is like your athlete, your bike rider. So it's $1,290 retail, and your customers will get $125 off. If they purchase within 30 days of the podcast launching, they will use a discount code, which you'll provide them in your notes. And then they get $125 off. So that's a portable device, battery operated, rechargeable battery, and it runs for about 10 hours of full charge.
So it
can be used for sleep.
You could use it for sleep? We didn't talk about sleep. Let's talk about sleep.
And sleep is one of the key aspects. Let me finish with this, and we'll go back to sleep. So you can use it for sleep. You could use it for relaxation. You could use it for tuning down the brain, relaxing the brain. You could use it for meditation. You could use it for brain fog. You can use it to wake you up. I did that myself one time. I had to go pick up my daughter at the airport at 2 o'clock in the morning. She was supposed to come in at 8:30, and I didn't want to do coffee because I had to get up in the morning to go work.
Right.
So I used it on the setting for alertness. Slapped the coil in the back of my head, and boing, kept it on until I got back home. I had no fatigue. I was alert, and I wasn't hyper. I was just alert. I was just awake. I got back home, as soon as I took it off, crashed.
Nice.
Went right to sleep.
Nice.
So it's tuning the brain. So we talk about sleep. It's tuning the brain frequencies to be in the state that you want them to be in. Like relaxation, like sleep, like pain reduction, like anxiety reducing, all of those other benefits.
Okay. So
that's the FlexPulse. It has 10 programs.
Can you dial in a specified brain wave? Like, can you go for gamma or alpha or delta?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There are 10 programs in the FlexPulse. So basically you can pick whatever one you want. We designed it to produce one frequency. The brain gets confused. If you're presenting the brain too much information, the brain doesn't know what to react to the most. So if you want to sleep, we use what I call flying delta. We'd use
Sounds
delta.
Like an airline.
Delta brainwaves. So you're at the lowest level of frequency. That's deep sleep.
Yes, we know.
So if you use it on your pillow while you're sleeping, it'll entrain the brain. The brain will start listening to it, and it will start slowing down significantly. And you run it all night long.
Well, just so the audience knows,
and then you can sleep
this
all
is
night
not
long.
making a sound. This is just entraining.
It is making a sound.
Okay, what's it making?
The applicator, the coil itself, has a little clicking sound to it. So this is what we call audio magnetic entrainment.
Okay.
So you're listening to that same sound that's going at the same pulse as the magnetic field. You're hearing the audio and you're getting the magnetic. So both of them are helping to entrain the brain.
Interesting. Does this end up training the brain to where people can then sleep without it? Let's say they do travel and they leave it at home.
Well, there's going to be some learning aspect to it. So it's like pre-hypnosis. If you hypnotize yourself, you know the state. So what happens in biofeedback is you learn the state that your brain feels like it's in, and you can induce it yourself. But it may not work that well because it depends on the other sort of factors that are going on around you. So this is in a sense, a mechanical factor that is reliable and consistent. Whereas your mind is not so reliable.
Well,
and
maybe.
consistent. Well, if you're a yogi and you're a professional meditator, yes, maybe.
I think one of the goals is to get the mind under control. But I do like tools that can actually help facilitate it. Like if you're trying to teach somebody how to meditate, have never meditated, they don't know what it feels like. And so one of the tricks is to actually be able to get them to experience that. It's like riding a bike. If you can't ride a bike, you keep falling off until you feel it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can get back to this thing.
Exactly correct. Yeah. Exactly correct. And so one of the programs in the FlexPulse is theta.
Yeah.
So most people who meditate are meditating in theta. Professional meditators eventually meditate in gamma.
Right.
And so we have delta for meditation if you wanted to. We have theta for meditation if you wanted to. And we have gamma.
And gamma is also associated with flow states.
And is often associated with flow states.
So I'm curious. I used some transcranial magnetic stimulation. Was it? No, transmagnetic electrical stimulation with Halo Sport headphones from a company called Halo Neuro. They're out of business now, but it would stimulate the motor cortex and open up neuroplasticity in the motor cortex. And I could wear it on my way to mountain bike, let's say. And when I put my helmet on, I'd go into a flow state just immediately. There was no warm up. There was nothing. It was just like you were right there. And I'm curious.
And that's a learning thing. But the difference between the Halo and the PEMF is the Halo doesn't go into the brain. It stimulates the nervous system.
Well, it's stimulating the motor cortex. So,
down the road it is. What you're doing is because it's microcurrent, very low intensity, you're basically stimulating the nerves in the skin, right? Which then go to the brainstem, which then spread themselves through the brain. Magnetic fields do both, do that, and at the same time they go through the skull into the brain.
So if I wore do they make a cap, an PEMF cap?
We do
Okay.
not. Yeah, we do not. We have not sort of found that there's a huge market for this yet.
So, Dr. Gladden, one of the things that I've
Steve?
done is I bought a micropulse back in 2019, which is a small PEMF device. And what I did is I've got a skull cap, and I just stuffed them. I stuffed the coils.
That's what you do. You put it under a hat or a cap or a hair band.
Right on top of my motor cortex, and I just hit what flow state, what gamma, and just would rock climb with that on.
Nice.
That particular machine has both 10 hertz and 100 hertz, primarily 100 hertz. So 10 hertz is alpha, and 100 hertz is gamma. It's an upper range of gamma.
Okay. And what's the name of that device?
It's micropulse, the M1.
On our website, it's called micropulse A9.
Yeah, I've got the M1 device,
and the M1 is much more complicated.
Yeah, a lot more settings. I can set it for Schumann resonance and a whole bunch of other ones.
Nice. Cool. Very cool. Okay. So we interrupted you, but this is interesting. So the conversation about sleep and performance now, and choosing your brainwave, what you want to kind of entrain.
Whatever you want to put yourself into, correct. So it's got the ability to do 10 programs. Battery operated, portable enough, stick it in a pocket, put the coils wherever you need.
Okay.
We talked about testosterone. Well, if you are going to spend the night with somebody, then you might want to.
Where are you going to put the coil?
Put it in your pocket.
Where are you going to put the coils?
Close.
Okay.
Close.
All right. Are these the same coils that go on your thighs if you want a mountain bike?
You betcha.
All right.
So these are all multi-utility pieces of equipment. Okay. They do all the things that magnets do, that magnetic fields do. What they don't do depends on the intensity, essentially.
Okay. All right. So that was number one.
All right. So people would get $125 off for the Flex Pulse. The next piece of equipment is called the BioBalance. And the BioBalance is a whole body magnetic system. There are a lot of magnetic systems. Most of the magnetic systems that are being sold that are low intensity are 1 Gauss or less.
Okay. Ooh. That's pretty low.
And you can spend $6,000 for a 1 Gauss machine. Okay. They're multi-level marketing, and they don't tell you what the intensity is. They tell you all the sizzle and so on that you're going to get, right? But they don't talk about the parameters. So the BioBalance is designed to compete with those machines and be 10 times stronger for a lot less. So for about half the price, you're getting 10 times the intensity.
So you're getting 10 Gauss?
You're getting 10 Gauss for both the small applicator and the large applicator, and you could run them both at the same time.
How many Gauss?
Without loss of intensity.
How many Gauss is the small one, the first one we talked about?
That one is like the Flex Pulse. It's about 100 Gauss per coil, 200 Gauss for 2 coils. So it's dramatically bigger, but it's not whole body.
That's right.
All right. So for that one, people can get $190 off.
Okay.
Retail price is $2,600.
Okay. So it'd be $2,410, is what you're saying.
And the last one that we are offering a discount for is called the Tesla Fit, like Tesla the car and Fit, F-I-T, Tesla Fit plus sign 2, Tesla Fit plus 2.
Okay. Tell us about that.
And it's a portable machine that gets up to as much as 4,000 Gauss.
Oh, wow. Now that's a full body, I take it?
That has a whole body pad. You can choose a constellation of different applicators. My recommended constellation, basically, or configuration, is a whole body pad, because who shouldn't do whole body? And then a local applicator. And the local applicator is a double loop coil.
Okay.
So a double loop allows you to treat a bigger area, or you can collapse it on top of itself and get a more concentrated field locally, like a shoulder or a hip or a back or a chest, whatever.
Got it.
Or a brain.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, there are a lot of people who are shied away from magnetic field therapy to the brain. I don't. And I'm going to go back to a point you were making earlier about risk. And the risk with higher intensity machines is people go too high too fast.
Okay.
And this is a common problem in the practice setting where people go to professionals to get treatments because you have a limited amount of time and you're paying by the minute. So they tend to crank it up too fast. So we don't know what a person could do. The analogy that I use is athletic training. You don't get off a couch and run a marathon tomorrow. You have to train. How long it takes you to train up to what you want to do, 5K, 10K, whatever, It's going to depend on your conditioning. It's going to depend on your health in general, and so on. So we have on our website, we have something called a low and slow protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of gives you like three basic routes that you can get to the peak, because the intensity where you want to go is to be the maximum intensity and the maximum time. If you're at maximum intensity, maximum time, you're healthy.
Right.
The body's healthy. It's ignoring the magnetic field after that.
Okay. So
now you can back off if you wanted to, but you basically then you've got the maximum that you're going to likely need.
Well, that makes good sense, quite honestly. Yeah, I think that's true for most things. It's easy to overdo stuff. So
people are eager. They want to get results now. Mm-hmm. They don't understand physiology. They don't understand the healing process itself. You know, our goals and aspirations are often bigger than, like, our mouth is bigger than our stomach.
Yeah, no, that's it. But no, there's a lot of wisdom in that, in allowing the body to go at its own pace. And so you have to listen to your body and allow it to go at its own pace. Your body kind of knows what it needs. So that's good. Okay. So that's the third one. So
that's the third one. So that's the Tesla Fit Plus 2, and it's a portable.
Okay.
So it does have wheels, and it does have a retractable handle on it. So that'd be easy enough to take on a plane with you. And these do go through the airport without a problem.
Okay.
So that one, people would get $345 off. So $345. You're also talking about a machine that's going to cost you about $7,800.
Okay.
But it's got the intensity to do most things that most people need. And it'll treat those autoimmune problems, the Lyme disease problems, arthritis in multiple areas of the body, spinal problems up and down the whole spine. It's all the things that you need a bigger area of coverage for.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I think there will be people that as you're thinking about that, and if you're really interested to get one of these, just think about the application, what you need, and try to get the thing that's best for you. Yeah. So awesome.
Educating yourself, I think, is very important.
Yeah, I would educate yourself. And maybe get a free concept.
You can do the website, or you can get the book. Yeah. The best book, the best tool would be Supercharge Your Health with PEMF Therapy. It's got the tables, it's got the advice, it's got the programs, it's got the recommendations for different conditions. If you want more of the science, if you're geeking and you want to know what the studies are that support the technology, then Power Tools for Health is the book you might want. It's got 500 references.
Got it. Okay, beautiful. Well, this has been really, really fun, both fun and informative and enlightening. I was looking forward to this conversation, Bill. So it was really great. I hope you enjoyed it. We had a good time.
I always have a good time.
Well, good. And you were drinking coffee the whole time.
No, I had that just before we started. I didn't have a chance to. I was talking too much. I didn't have a chance to put it up to my mouth. There you go.
All right. Well, it's cold now.
It is cold. I drink it cold. Doctors drink coffee cold.
Well, that's the only way they drink it. So
we don't have a choice. Right. We eat dinner cold. We eat coffee. Drink coffee cold.
It. All right. Well, again, thanks so much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.